This is the Paddock Pass Podcast. I'm Adam Wheeler, and taking over hosting duties this week as Steve English is attending the Marc VDS Superbike team launch and also hovering around the test, which I think is taking place in Jerez, right? Can't remember. It's cool to be joined by a man who makes pink headphones look like a tasteful fashion accessory. Our podcast sage, even though he's a vegetarian, Mr. David Emmett. Also
sage is a herb. I'd just like to point out that sage is actually a herb, so it's perfectly fine for me to eat lots of sage. And in fact, we have a few varieties in the garden, so there you go.
Perfectly. Thanks, Dave. Also a person who can name every championship finish by Norick Abbey, but who once forgot to pack his underwear for the Valencian Grand Prix, the esteemed Neil Morrison. Our final musketeer on this show is a person with many hats in the wardrobe: TV pundit and expert, former racer in at least 5 high-profile series, an academy director and Moto3 team principal, and an all-round good egg. Welcome, Michael Laverty.
Thank you very much, Adam. Nice to see you, Neil, David, and Happy New Year to everyone.
Before we start, our thanks, as always, to Renthal for their support. They support the best motocross and supercross teams in the business. But there's also a big complement of street accessories. Just watch Kawasaki Racing Team in World SBK this year to see and know the difference Renthal can make. We also have some KTM backing for the podcast. 2024 is the 70th anniversary for the company and the 30th anniversary for the KTM Duke lineup. 125s, 390s, 690s, 790s, 890s, 990s, and the Super Duke, the whole lot. Has anyone in this podcast ridden a KTM apart from me?
I rode a 990 Super Adventure a very long time ago, and it was an enormously fun bike. I also noticed that you skipped out on the 1190, the 1090, 1190, 1290, and now 1390 of the KTM range. I was looking at that.
But they're not Dukes, Dave. They're Super Adventures.
No. The 1390 is a Super Duke. I think you'll find. I would know because I've been watching videos of it on the YouTubes.
Okay, Michael, we know you've got an association with Honda, so maybe you don't want to say too much, particularly when it comes to Moto3, but have you ever ridden a KTM?
Lots of the off-road bikes, never on-road. So, I've got a 300 Enduro upstairs for a bit of play riding on. I've always enjoyed the KTM off-road lineup, and their two-stroke range is top-notch. So, yeah, still... I'd never got the opportunity other than doing some test riding with their WP team, but that was on actually a Yamaha R1, but it was linked to KTM at the time, so I've never actually rode a KTM on-road bike, but yeah, one day. Yeah,
the two-strokes TPIs, good bikes. In general, the Dukes light bikes with massive amounts of torque that leave you grinning like a lecturer's grandfather in a Pilates class. So check them out if you can, KTMs. Firstly, updates. I'm off to Austria tomorrow to actually help KTM with their MotoGP team launch videos. Minus 5 degree temperatures coming up, so not going to be too pleasant. And then the Ducati launch in Italy, and finally Trackhouse the week after that in Los Angeles. Dave, you're getting ready for the first team launch of the preseason, which is going to be Gresini, but it seems that they've had their thunder stolen somewhat by a Spanish lager, Estrella Galicia, and the Marquez brothers kind of spilling the beans ahead of time.
Yeah, well, someone's got to pay the bills, don't they? So, I mean, obviously, Mark said last year that it wasn't true that he wasn't going to get paid for racing in 2024. He didn't actually specify that it would be Gresini paying him a salary. But yeah, Estrella Galicia is one of his personal sponsors. There's a few of them. Estrella Galicia, Allianz Insurance, I think. Also Red Bull. He's a massive Red Bull athlete. So it's going to be very interesting to see how much Red Bull branding there is, both on his leathers and on the bike itself. So, because that's the other thing. We also know that Red Bull has gone from Repsol Honda, of course.
Neil, there's only a few days before Madonna di Campiglio, the Ducati launch, where we'll be meeting up and doing the podcast. Are you half marathon training? What have you been up to?
A little bit of that, yes. I'm actually going to the Gresini launch as well, lad. So I'll be joining our friend Dave over in Riccione on Saturday, I think it is. And then, we're driving up together to the Dolomite Mountains on Sunday. So, yeah, a couple of fun days ahead, a couple of launches, a few free dinners, all being well as well.
Michael, I don't know where to start. What about the team, MLav Racing for 2024? I can imagine it's been a busy time with emails, administration, just trying to get things sorted.
Yeah, pretty much. That's the winter for life as a team owner, which I never quite realised just how much the team boss has to do. Just getting everything in place with sponsors. the admin side is one thing, getting staff locked down, getting everyone's contracts signed, then more importantly, getting the sponsors in place, making sure everyone's happy, sorting out the branding. We're changing all trucks and hospitality units, and then Honda bringing out a new bike. So yeah, a massive overhaul of our kit and fleet. We're expanded in Junior GP to run the British talent team alongside Dorna, so that requires more staff and more bikes and more kit. And also in British Talent Cup, we've gone from 3 riders last year to 6 next year. So yeah, it's just never ending, making sure you've got everything in place that you need, all the material, the budget, most importantly. Unfortunately, we lost Vision Track at the end of last season, so we don't have a title sponsor. So at the moment, I'm working hard to try and replace Vision Track. At the moment, the team's going to be called MLav Racing until we find a suitable replacement for Vision Track. So yeah, not easy when you lose your title sponsor, but it is what it is. It's the current financial climate, and it's not easy to find a replacement when we're sort of, even though we're in a World Championship Series, we're definitely more angled towards the UK market, having all British riders. But yeah, it's trucking along. I've got a good business partner in the team now. It takes a bit of load off my shoulders, takes a bit of the financial load off as well, and we're looking good for the season ahead, and looking forward to seeing what Honda brings for the 2024 machine. It looks like everything's changed, which we needed a little bit of a step up to compete with KTM's, and so yeah, a lot of differences with the 2024 package. So look forward to seeing it on track in Portugal in mid-Feb.
Michael, you mentioned how difficult it is to get sponsorship. What kind of is the process for you? Could you shed some light onto, for our listeners? Is it a case of leaning heavily on the contact book? Can you work with an agency? Where do you even begin to try and get, a sizable check to be able to go racing in MotoGP for a full season?
Yeah, I've been fortunate in contacts to this point, but now I am actually engaging with an agency. So I've got actually some meetings this week to try and get some assistance. I put together sponsor proposals and packs and try and put a presentation, and that the design side of that, coming up with visuals and proposals, takes a lot of time. So you might produce 20 or 30 of them and maybe only get one if you're lucky, and it may only be for a secondary sponsor or a smaller sponsor. A lot of the companies in the UK, they want to go to BSB. It's easy to send their clients to a British Superbike race, and they'll get the VIP hospitality and have an easy weekend. It's harder to get people who want to, or who have a kind of a global client base, or European at least, that they can send their clients to get the hospitality, have the weekend in the MotoGP paddock. So I'm finding more people are interested in doing that. Like Lucio Cecchinello's done for years, smaller packages, maybe one event deals, send their customers or their clients. So I'm trying to attract those. It's always easier if you can attract the big title sponsor, because if you have 10 secondary sponsors, you have to give each of those the same face time, the same commitment. Whereas if you've got one, it's more or less the same process, but for a much bigger branding, but you only have one senior title sponsor to look after. So yeah, at the moment I'm just still exercising the contact book, the contacts I've made over the years, but trying to branch out a little bit. It's like I mentioned earlier, it is difficult to stay in the British track completely. I did have options which would have made my life easier to choose a rider from a different nationality, and it brought a sponsorship package with it, so it would have been easier, but I wanted to stay the course. It's probably going to be that I'm not always able to stay that way, just judging by how tough it's been this winter, so I may have to diversify. But as long as I keep one British rider, let's say in Moto3 Grand Prix each year, it keeps that alive, but I may have to look to other avenue streams when it comes to nationalities, because it changes your conversations with sponsors quite a lot.
Michael, how does the sort of the changing calendar, the expanding calendar, how does that affect your sort of searching for sponsorship? Because obviously, the broader we go and the bigger we go, the broader the audience. But that also, companies tend to operate in markets, and they're really particularly interested in serving a particular market. And the more global you get, it's almost like you get bigger. There are bigger parties interested, but fewer of them.
Yeah, that is true. The Asian market's still relatively untapped, as is going to India last year has definitely potentially opened some doors for the future. I've had a lot of contact with Indian companies and riders that want to come and race in Junior GP. So there is potential there to open doors for the future. I know there's untapped markets that we aren't really getting into, but it's not easy. It's finding those contacts. It's doing the networking when you're in those countries. I think it'll definitely pay off long term. The broader we go, but at the same time, it makes it harder to get mechanics and staff on board over 22 rounds because now all of a sudden you're asking a lot more of them. It's not easy right now. So I had some mechanics that worked in both my junior GP and GP team last year. They're all a little bit like, no, that's too much to do 22 rounds, then come back and do a 7-round junior GP plus a couple of tests. So you don't have much of a home life. But I don't think we'll ever end up. I don't think we'll have the budgets to be like Formula One and have 2 teams, but it's almost heading that way. But yeah, those markets, I think the MotoGP teams will tap into those first, and then hopefully the smaller teams in Moto2 and Moto3 can pick up a few smaller deals off the back of that. But it should work out.
Michael, I'm just curious, you've now had 2 full seasons as a team owner in the World Championship in Moto3, and there's been some good moments, some difficult moments as well. I would just like to know, over those 2 years, what's kind of the biggest thing that you've learned in your current position that you can kind of take forward into the next couple of years?
Yeah, it's been interesting. It's been massively different than I had anticipated. I've learned a lot in those 2 years. Still not. I've never been good at managing people. I had Taylor McKenzie in there as my team manager. It's hard being everyone's friend. So whether it's riders, staff, mechanics, parents, they're handling everyone is a little bit difficult. You're never going to please everyone, and I've struggled with that side of it because you have to give some bad news at times. You can't please everyone. But in general, it's been good. I got to say, the World Championship is good in the support we get from IRDA. I still manage a lot of the behind the scenes with the travel and everything, but IRDA do make our life easy, organising all our freight and shipping and the carnets and the work that goes on there. The IRDA guys have been such a good support, as have Dorna, to be fair. They put a lot behind the teams assisting us to travel around the globe in 22 races. It's not easy, but yeah, overall, I've enjoyed the process. Year 1 was really tough because I had to stretch a budget to its absolute limit. So I was doing a lot of jobs myself that I knew I could do. So it just meant I was burning the candle at both ends. I don't think I could have kept doing that year on year. So last year I brought in a business partner, and that took a lot of load off my shoulders, and it meant I've got a bit of my own life back. And then I'm hoping to grow that again for the 3rd season. So learn to delegate a little bit more, have more budget on hand that you can employ people to do jobs that I had to plug holes with. But yeah, I don't think we underestimated the task, but coming up into World Championship, I know Scott and Josh both came from Junior GP, but because we're a brand new team, unfortunately the Honda was a little bit of a disadvantage against the KTMs, especially over the last season, 2022. At times it was a little bit closer. Weirdly, the Honda won the championship with Leopard, but when you look at the rest of the Hondas, they're that little bit below the KTMs in general performance. So keeping the riders' morale up, because they felt like they were on a hiding to nothing at times, even though Scott had some really good results, as did Josh towards the end of 2023 before unfortunately he got hurt in Qatar. He was having such a strong performance week on week. He was improving. He was getting up into the top 10 in practice and qualifying sessions, and yeah, really chipping down those last few tenths. So yeah, it's been really pleasing to see the progress on Josh's side, and frustrating for Scott because he started last season so strong, and then it sort of tapered off a little bit towards the end of the year. But he's also picked up an injury in Valencia, but hopefully both will be back to full fitness for when we roll out on track in Portugal in February. But yeah, both riders having a bit of a tough winter, to be fair.
Yeah. Are you able to give our listeners a wee bit of an idea, Michael, just how busy you have been over the last couple of years? Because I feel every time that I've bumped into you in a MotoGP paddock, you're telling me that you've just come from a CEV round, or maybe it's a round in the BSB Championship, and it seems like you're just like always on the move. You said you're obviously trying to delegate that a little bit better, but back in 2022, I mean, how many weekends basically were you working a year, and will that be drastically reduced in 2024?
A little bit. Not as I'll still keep my finger on the pulse with all 3 teams, but in 2022, as I said, I was mainly in Junior GP. We had enough budget in the Grand Prix team from the get-go that we could employ people for every role, having Taylor in there as team manager, having everything rolling without me in the pit box. But for Junior GP, I was driving the truck and managing the parts and managing the pit box, and so I was basically getting back from a GP doing my at the end it was BT Sport, but with TNT Sports, so I do my work as a pundit and commentator, then Monday or Tuesday fly to the workshop in Barcelona, drive, whether it was Estoril or Portugal, drive the truck down there, then help set up and then work through the weekend, then get it back to the workshop and then fly on to the next race. So in between that, I still was bookkeeping, so I was getting all the receipts off every member of staff, booking all the travel, doing the accounts, and trying to, even initially setting it all up was hard because Brexit really hurt us as a UK based team. Luckily, I have an Irish passport and I set up an Irish company, which has made life easier, to be honest, that we don't need carnets for everything when we race in Europe. So I did put some good... I spoke to Paul Denning and spoke to Sean Muir, who were both going through the similar scenario. So I got some good direction. We set up our GP workshop in Barcelona and run from an EU company. We do have a UK company as well, but it just made life easier in general. So yeah, 2022 was mental because I was doing so much. Then I just didn't have much time. My little boy was born at the end of 2021, so in his first year of life, I wasn't really around a lot. So last year, I wanted to be home more. I was still traveling a lot, but I wasn't going to every single junior GP. So Macaulay Webb, who was chief mechanic for Josh, had come to work with me in junior GP, and I identified that he was quite good in terms of the organisation and the management logistics, using his own initiative, just doing things without me having to tell him. So in the end, he's become my team manager and team coordinator down there. So I could, at the end of last season, I could just stay home and watch on the TV, which was good, and trust Macaulay and the boys to run it. So he'll stop traveling GPs next year and solely focus on the junior GP team. So he's going to run that. It meant that I had to find a good chief mechanic to replace him in Grand Prix. But yeah, just finding those key people makes your life a lot easier. So in the British Talent Cup team now, I've got Jordan Pritchard and Nathan Smith, and basically they can run everything. I don't have to. They sign off on spend with me, and that's about it. I don't really have to do too much now with that team. I do want to pop in and make sure everything's going right, which is 2-3 races a year, but it's when you're doing 22 GPs, 3 BSBs and say 3 or 4 CEVs, you don't have many weekends left if you want to have January and December at home.
Michael, I passed by once in the beginning. I have to say your cooking and hospitality wasn't the best. So I really hope you've managed to get someone else on that front in the last year or two. But on a serious note, I appreciate you maybe have some, you have to tackle this diplomatically, but tell me about the relationship, or ask about the relationship with Honda, because I think for most Moto3 fans watching last year, and you said yourself, you alluded to the fact that it was a little bit of a hiding to nothing. It wasn't quite the bike to have, even though it won the world championship, of course, with Jaume Masia. But, are they going to give you more support next year? Is there going to be a little bit more in terms of resources? Do you think the package is going to be more competitive, or is it just one of those compromise things where you get a level of support and you just really have to make the most of it?
Yeah, in a way, it is frustrating, but at the same time, we're all essentially in the same boat. So, you just got to commend Leopard. They do a slightly better job than the rest of the Honda teams. I think a lot of that's, they've got good experienced people in there, but also they've got the biggest budget to employ them, to develop, to spend time in the wind tunnel, because it literally is marginal gains to steal David Brailsford's line. But the smallest things make the biggest difference in Moto3. So Honda gave a good package. Unfortunately, not unfortunately, it's good because budget-wise, it's locked over 3 years. So we've bought all new bikes for 2024. But you'll just upgrade those for the next couple of years. I say upgrade them. You do. Everyone thinks you buy a bike as a whole. You really don't. You build it in parts. It's the same when you speak to the MotoGP teams. There's never actually a whole bike. It's a new frame. It just constantly evolves. New engine, new wiring loom, new ECU. You change the parts all the time. So it's never the same bike from the beginning to the end of the year. But what the new rules do so well is the 3-year technical freeze means that you're buying. You can stock up early on because you'll be using that same material. When it comes to the parts you get, you've got the exact same engines, the exact same electronics package and ECU, the exact same exhaust, even suspension, tires, it's all identical. So we have the same material as all the other Honda teams. It just seemed like KTM somehow, they have a test team with Efrain Vazquez. They're working on the peripheries, which you can change. There are certain parts that you can change, and then there are homologated parts that you're not allowed to adjust. But somehow they were eking out a little bit year on year, when in theory it should have remained fairly stagnant in terms of development over the 3-year period. That's the plan for the technical freeze, but didn't quite work out. So it meant by year 3, KTM had found enough for every team across the board, and it just seemed like they had a little bit of an advantage. So it was hard keeping our riders motivated. But then you would arrive at a circuit in the Honda chassis, because it always turned good and the riders liked it. You'd think, oh, they've got something this weekend, but it's just hard in race trim because you can't use the flow in Moto3. Everyone's slipstreaming, passing, bulking each other in the corners, and the KTMs can fight better because they can stop and go a little bit easier. So where Honda was strong, they couldn't really use that strength as often. But Jaume Masia did a great job to win the championship. Obviously there was the Qatar incident that sort of tainted it a little bit, but how he rode in the races around the second half of the season, he was, in my opinion, head and shoulders above at times. I know Ayumu took the fight to him really good, but I think Jaume was the complete package and was getting the most out of his bike, even though Leopard did have a bit of more top speed than the rest of the Honda teams.
Yeah, where is that coming from? Because, two things. First of all, in Moto3, my criticism of Moto3 is always that so much of it, it's quite hard for a rider to make a difference because of the importance of slipstreaming. Slow riders can keep up because of the slipstream. Because of slipstreaming, you could always make a pass. But also it becomes really important the package around it. The mechanics, the even like the data guys and all the rest of it. The finding that little bit of that extra hundredth in the case of Moto3 it just becomes really, really important.
Yeah, it's frustrating for me now as a team boss, looking at it and feeling frustrated, because previously I had the same feeling when I was helping John McPhee in the class, and I felt he was a better rider than he was able to show at times. And it is because sometimes the bravest rider, the one who's not scared to push the other rider off the track, is the one who comes to the fore. And David Munoz is a perfect example. He's a quality rider, but sometimes it's just purely his aggression that makes the result happen, and he's not scared to make some enemies out there. So there's times whenever it is the lap times can be 2 seconds a lap slower throughout the race, and it's just staying in a bunch because of the slipstream, the overtakes, not allowing a rider to get his head down and just work in a rhythm. There's been years when you could do that, but predominantly 125 and Moto3 has always been a group battle. But the way the class has evolved with the young kids coming up, obviously now they're 18 years old, but even when they were 16 years old, they were just ultra aggressive coming in from junior GP, sticking it up the inside, not scared, didn't realise the danger they were putting themselves in. Some of the weaving we've seen down straights, and I'm glad to see it's tidied up a little bit last season, but it still scares me at times watching them. And it's a different way of racing. And I think Jaume Masia said it. He wanted to get out of the class. He was over Moto3 because of the tactics and how you ride and how the races evolve.
Michael, you mentioned obviously Josh was kind of coming into his own towards the end of last year before that injury in Qatar that he sustained. With Scott, I remember back in pre-season, I think he topped one of the tests in Jerez, and I spoke to him at the final pre-season test, and both he and the team were thinking maybe, he could be up there fighting regularly in the top 10, and he did have some really good weekends, but we did see it maybe tail off a little bit towards the end. I mean, we know that Scott's super talented, but didn't quite work out as I think everyone imagined last year. I mean, are you able to kind of shed some light on what happened there?
Yeah, difficult to exactly put a finger on it because, as you said, he was super fast at the start of the season, did top the Jerez pre-season test, fast in most testing and qualifying sessions. He's definitely one of those riders who falls foul of the ultra-aggressive nature of the Moto3 racing. So he could do a lap time. If it was a time trial event, he'd have been top 5, top 10 a lot more frequently, but being able to position himself in the races was difficult. In Argentina, almost got the podium in the wet. He was super strong in the wet, which shows the class of his skill and his feeling, his level as a rider. But it's somehow managing to make his way through the pack has been difficult. Whether it is he is a little bit taller, he's skinny, he's lean, he works hard to stay to the weight limit, but he doesn't have the ability to pass on the straights. So he can hang in the slipstream, but with that scenario where you're never able to draft alongside, you've always got people swarming you, and it sometimes is hard to go forward in the grip. But he's not Scott's not one of those ultra aggressive riders who is dive bombing on the brakes, but maybe it takes a little bit more of that to get the end result that he needs, because he's definitely got the speed and the talent. And I think he just got, the crash in India was big. He had a few big ones, and maybe his confidence was just knocked a little bit towards the end of the season. But the speed was still there. It was just an unfortunate end, and then getting hurt in Valencia, definitely not how he wanted to finish it. But yeah, we fully believe in Scott, and he scored points. He can front row. He can fight for pole position in the wet every time, can fight for podiums in the wet, and he's fast enough in the drive. We're hoping that the package from Honda does give us a little bit of a step up in performance for 2024 that allows him to kind of develop and show us what he's capable of week in, week out.
What's the emotion around running the team, Michael? Is it something where you have a great deal of pride, but then do you also feel the responsibility? Because, I mean, even your own personal experience and that of your brother as well, I mean, you made big compromises and took risks to come to World Championship racing. And now we look, the theme of British riders in GP is always talked about, and it has been for the last few years, but you're providing a platform for that to exist and to get better. I mean, I imagine it's quite a responsibility to bear. It's, while you're trying to make the numbers happen each year to go racing, there's almost like a necessity for it,
Yeah, the compromise you talk about still happens, and it frustrates me because I want to just have enough budget that all we focus on is performance, but you have to balance the books, you have to cut the cloth to suit, and we have a decent budget, but when you're trying to compete with the likes of Leopard, you're not in the same level at all. So yeah, like I say, it is hard to get enough budget that you can spend the time in the wind tunnel, that you can develop the last little bit. So it's not huge, because when you go to the wind tunnel, you can't change your bodywork as drastically as say in MotoGP, but you can make little tweaks with how everything's positioned, with how the rider sits on the bike, with how much excess material is on their suit. All those little bits make a difference in Moto3, and it is, at the end of the day, it's budgetary as in how far we can push. So we're always, I think we're doing a good job, but we're always trying to look inwards as well, because sometimes you blame the riders, sometimes the riders blame the team, but we're a team together, so we both accept our shortcomings and we try and push forth. So it is hard for me as a rider whenever I know what it's like for Scott, for Josh, when they're frustrated, they're feeling like their bikes aren't as fast as some of the others, where our crew are giving them the best tools that they can, and it still feels like you're on a little bit of a hiding, which is, it's hard to put your finger on why, because like I explained earlier, everything is identical: engines, electronics, exhaust. So there's not a lot we can do other than wind tunnel, really, slightly lighter parts, or try and stay on the weight limit. That is the big thing in Moto3, is getting down to the weight limit and staying on it comfortably.
Michael, just two things about next year. I mean, first of all, we've had one preseason test at Valencia at the end of last year. The new Honda, are we expecting something that's going to be radically different from what you had before? And then also, I guess we've got Pirelli coming in as the sole tire supplier, taking over from Dunlop. Do you envisage a kind of massive shift in how things kind of play out in Moto3, or do you think it will kind of be as it was?
No, I'm hoping that the Pirelli change will make some. I know in Moto2, I feel it'll make a drastic shift to how the races are, but I think it'll affect the tyre preservation is going to become a thing in Moto3, which it hasn't typically been. Dunlops have been generally always had an option that will last distance without having to manage. I think it will change also the tactics throughout a practice session, because the tyre drop that Pirelli has, it's not a drop because it still performs really good, but it's got a 3-lap window that typically is, you've got a good percentage improvement, so you're not going to have the luxury of just going for it and hanging about and waiting for a tow. You're going to have to go out of the pit box and push on right from the get-go. So yeah, I think that's going to be the biggest thing, the tyre side of things. I do think the improvements from Honda, with they've got new engine, that's one of the things to try and get that little bit of punch off the turns to match the KTM. But they've changed a lot. Visually, it's not going to look massively different, but they've changed a lot of the parts in the bike. So I think it's going to make a big step.
Just one thing about the change to Pirellis, because that really is interesting. I think also, especially in Moto2, I think you're going to see a big difference. But you say because you've got the drop in tyres, Do you think that's going to change the way that the racing develops? Do you think we'll see less slipstreaming? Do you think it'll be harder to actually stick with someone?
I hope so. I do think the tire management is going to become a thing that you have to really think about it. So races will be decided. The other side of it is the ability with a Pirelli to really activate the tire straight off as soon as the lights go out, so you can push so hard through the first set of corners and maybe put half a second in if you're brave. So being able to drop the hammer from the get-go means front row of the grid is going to be so important because you can get away. I think they will change the dynamic. I hope it changes the slipstream effect that it is riders being able to use their tire in those early laps, get away, make a difference. I know the smaller tire isn't the same as the Moto2 or it's going to have a bit more of a consistency because you're not dealing with the same level of horsepower, same load, same weights into the tire. It doesn't drop. It doesn't have such an issue with the heat. So I think it's going to be a bit more level, a bit more like the Dunlop feel, but it'll certainly change the character.
Before we move on, a reminder that our friends at Fly Racing are back in the Paddock Pass Podcast in 2024. There's a range of motorcycling gear on the website, flyracing.com, and not only excellent off-road products like the Evo DST with BOA custom fit, but the Zone Pro goggles and, of course, the superlative Formula helmet, which is actually the lid that I use. I've tried Arai, Shoei, Laser, Fox, and the Formula is the best I've had for comfort, ventilation, and, of course, the AIS system with Rion Tech and Conehead EPS. Great stuff. Have a look at flyracing.com for more. Michael, we want you to change your cap now from, you know much more than us about Grand Prix racing. And last week on the Paddock Pass podcast, we did a show pretty much about the main stories going into 2024. The first of which was Marc Marquez, a title contender or a man who's going to be sort of fucking things up slightly. What's your opinion?
Definite title contender. I've always been one of the guys to champion Marc's raw speed and his ability and what he can do. Obviously, coming off, 4 seasons now of injury, pretty much since his title winning season in 2019 was phenomenal. And I do think he's still got that race head. Now he's on the best bike. As a Ducati runner, you got to look at him and say he's going to be a title contender. He's going to really shift the dynamic. Obviously, we've seen it becoming a fight between Pecco and Jorge. I think that now Marc in there just changes everything. So he's ultra aggressive. Obviously, Alex showed what was possible for Marc whenever he made the transition, and now Marc's going to follow suit. So he's learned how to ride the Ducati. I thought watching him at Valencia at the test was just different because he wasn't over the limit and he was still super fast within 10 laps. He was in control. He wasn't the Marc that you come to expect pushing the front, fighting it sideways loose. He just looked like he was trying to understand the bike and he was super fast. So I think everyone needs to be worried because his raw speed is he's probably, I'd say Casey Stoner's maybe the only one that we've ever seen that has that element of being able to ride a bike at 100% and find its absolute limits within a few laps. He's unparalleled at the moment in MotoGP, I believe. I think there's some really talented and fast riders, but just Marc has that special edge that once in a generation raw speed, and we've seen it twice in a generation with Casey as well. But I think I've no doubt he's going to be a real, as long as he stays injury free, there's a good chance he'll be champion at the end.
Obviously, you're the only one of us who's ridden a MotoGP bike, so you actually know the process of switching bikes, of changing bikes, because that's the one thing that everyone talks about in terms of Marc is, can he switch? And also, we're going to get into silly season. We're going to see sort of Fabio Quartararo maybe shopping himself around, Jorge Martin shopping himself around, different riders looking at different bikes. How easy is it to change brands, to change to a different bike? Because as you say, you could see, I had the same it was really interesting watching Marc, especially those first few laps, because he was going into turn 1 and looking to see where his braking marker was, but he was choosing turn 1 because you can run on at turn 1. It's not an issue. Do you know what I mean? And he ran wide. I think the first 2-3 laps he was really wide, and then he was a little bit less wide, and then he made it, and then he moved on to the next sort of thing. So it was really interesting to actually watch him sort of work through that. But the process of adapting, how easy is it to adapt? Do you need to be a special rider to adapt? Or, how does it work?
It's different depending on the package you're getting onto. So because he's jumping on Ducati, which has got so much data for it. They can dial it in to his request almost from the off. So I think Luca Marini has the flip side, going to a bike that needs development work. So when you're jumping on a package that doesn't have a clear direction of how it works best, and you're trying to find your feet with it, that takes some time. You have to engineer a package to work for your riding style. But I think Ducati at the moment have got such a good base that Marc wanted to adapt to it, so he didn't adjust much from the outside. It didn't look like he was changing too much. He was learning how the bike worked. Obviously, you look at Digi at the end of the year, went his own direction in terms of chassis setup and found something even better for him. I think Marc will get his teeth into that when he gets to Malaysia. But knowing that you've got such a good base to work from, a bike that stops, that turns, doesn't have to be overridden. Its main advantage is accelerating off the corner. It's so stable, so solid. It doesn't look like a MotoGP bike. It doesn't pump. It doesn't move. It's planted. So he was almost just taking a step back from his 100%, which he said he was going to do on the Honda last year. So I think he got used to not riding over the limit all the time. So he was back just within himself a little bit, learning the bike, letting it do the work. So I don't think that, obviously it can be tough to change manufacturer if the bike isn't working, but the change that Marc's making to the best bike on the grid, I think will be relatively smooth because it's such a good package right now. So I think if he went to an Aprilia or a KTM, which still is searching for that last little bit to equal Ducati, then it's a different scenario. But jumping on the Ducati, that's the easiest transition right now. It's like when everyone wanted to be on the Yamaha M1 back in the early 2010s, so 2012, 13, 14, around then. Everyone wanted to have the Yamaha as the base package. Now everyone's chasing the Ducati as the easier machine to ride. It's never easy, but it's easier. It gives the rider a little bit of comfort in the knowledge that they've got 8 bikes out there that all are competitive and can battle for victory.
What's your opinion on Jorge Martin? Because, I mean, fantastic rider, of course. The technique is amazing, as we saw from the early days in Moto3, but there always seems to be something kind of going on. There's almost like a chip on the shoulder. And as Dave was talking about with the swaps for 2025, his name's going to be up there. He's going to be talked about, could be distracting. I just wonder what your thoughts were.
Honestly, I think Jorge's still got margin to improve. He's really established himself this season, I believe. Took that step to becoming a championship contender. His raw speed, his raw talent and aggression was on show. His different riding style because of his stature. I think I do see the psychology in that he's had the chip on his shoulder a little bit, especially missing out on the factory ride to Enea ahead of 2023. That upset him, and it still rumbles on, and still now he's entering a season talking about looking to pastures new for 2025 if he doesn't get the factory contract he believes he deserves. That's fine if it's motivating him, and it seemed to last year. But yeah, if you focus on that too much, it can detract a little bit because he's in a good team with good bike, good material. He does seem to have the backing from the factory Ducati. He's got a factory Ducati contract, just not in red. So he's got everything there that he needs to fight for a title. But as Marc will prove this year, you don't have to be in factory red. So there'll be a Gresini Ducati, a Pramac Ducati, and a factory Ducati all battling for the title. They'll have Brad Binder to contend with, but I do think when I was in MotoGP, which was 2013 and 14, you had to be a Repsol Honda rider or a movie star Yamaha rider. You had to be in factory colours, and it had to be Japanese. It had to be Yamaha or Honda. If you were on a factory red Ducati then, as Nicky Hayden and Dovey were at the time, and then Cal Crutchlow, it was a bit of a hiding to nothing. So the sport has changed so much, and with it, the rise of the private team or the independent teams with staff that you look at Luca Marini and Bezzecchi with Valentino Rossi's old factory staff in there. You've got so many good engineers. Everyone is searching for those electronic engineers. KTM have got such a good roster now. A lot of experience that was gained at Ducati has been sort of farmed out around the paddock. And it means that the bikes are all at such a high level, but so are the teams. So the private teams have got good budgets, and obviously Dorna increased their support for the independent teams back in 2015 or 16. So it propped them up, allowed them to make sure they had year-old factory bikes. So now a year-old factory bike is so good that you could battle for a world championship on it. And I think Marco Bezzecchi showed it as well. He was still pretty raw in terms of his experience, but he was there without the injury, battling for a title last season. So it's so good in terms of we don't want it to all be Ducati, but it is a case of all the Ducati private teams can battle for victories. The the Aprilia move with Trackhouse, hopefully getting a little bit more support in Newali, basing themselves there. There'll be even more factory support there, so they'll hopefully have a second team that can battle for victories with a rider like Oliveira, who's definitely fast enough to battle for a title. So yeah, I think MotoGP's in a good place now that you don't have to be in factory colours, and I think Jorge, he's obviously wants the status of the factory Ducati position, but he's got the contract there, he's got the tools, and I don't think he should focus on it too much. So I think if he doesn't get the factory right, I can't see him jumping ship. And maybe it will be financially motivated, because obviously you can earn a bigger contract if you're a factory Yamaha or factory Honda rider than perhaps a Pramac Ducati rider with a factory contract. But yeah, the way it's going to evolve this year, I think it's going to be interesting to see what he goes for.
If you had to choose, would you take the shot at a world championship, or shall we say €8 million?
It is a tough one, and obviously you have a short career. I think you're still earning decent money, but whenever you get a factory contract and it is, say, €8 million, definitely makes you think. And obviously, everyone wants to win. Everyone's motivated. The biggest thing, the ego believes that it can deliver. So like Luca Marini, probably when he got offered the factory Honda ride, always wanted to be a factory Honda rider. Didn't look at the negatives and the crashes that the riders were having, but he looked at the contract, the paycheck, the ability that he believed, and I think he believes in his own, and so do a lot of people, his methodical way of working, his feedback, his ability to arrive at something that will work for him. And it looked like the Honda was a much better package in Valencia on the Monday that they did deliver, which was good to see. But yeah, you have to also have full belief in yourself, and sometimes that belief can make you choose questionable routes because you believe that you can make that difference, and it's not always the case. You're never going to beat Marquez, Pecco, and Jorge Martin on Ducatis whenever you're at a slight disadvantage with a different manufacturer, as Fabio Quartararo has shown us this year. It's just impossible as a previous world champion. If you don't have the tools, Joan Mir's fighting for the back of the pack, scraping points, and another former world champion. So you need the equipment. But if you've got the right people, the right development team behind the scenes, whether that's in Japan or the European test team with Honda, seem to be working hard with Stefan Bradl and trying to make inroads. So yeah, it's possible. Anything's possible with the right people and the right motivation.
Michael, before we let you go, I was just curious because you form part of the team covering the sport for TNT Sports. You have yourself, you have Alex Lowe's on there sometimes, Sylvain Gantoli, Neil Hodgson as well, of course. I just wonder, what's the bench racing like between you guys? Is it pretty intense, or is it quite sort of amiable?
No, it's all good. We all bow down to Sylvain. He's the current racer, still able to jump on a MotoGP bike and go ultra fast. So yeah, we do a bit of trash talking, mainly whenever Hodgie does his laps in the BMW. We give him a bit of stick, but in general, Hodgie's still fast when he puts his leathers on. Yeah, when Alex Lowe's arrives, again, another current rider, so we bow down to them. Yeah, I'm a few years out of my leathers, and even more so now. I'd never really planned to fully stop riding, but because I've been so busy, I've not been able to get on board too many bikes in the last couple of years. But yeah, we have a good crew there. Such good banter between everyone. Good having Gavin Emmett there steering the ship and Susie Perry when we're in presentation. So a lot of experience in there, a lot of good banter, good fun. We enjoy our jobs there with TNT Sports. It's a good crew.
Michael, thanks ever so much for your time. Best of luck for the season, and we look forward to seeing you in Qatar.
Thank you very much. Cheers, guys.
Thanks there to Michael Laverty. As we mentioned, guys, it's team launch time. I mean, MotoGP's been off the map for the last few weeks, last 2 months, I guess you could say. I guess it's the time also to look at whether we should be delighted or disappointed by the liveries to come up. Dave, I know you're always very vocal on this subject, but there's some kind of restrictions, really. I mean, we never see anything kind of different from Red Bull KTM or Monster Energy Yamaha or Repsol Honda, because there are certain constraints of how those motorcycles have to look. Whereas Pramac bikes have looked quite nice in the past, but also god awful. So, is there anything? It's still a novelty, isn't it? Seeing what a new motorcycle looks like for the season.
I mean, you've seen how I dress. You know how much attention I pay to the exterior appearance. I mean, one thing is, at Repsol, obviously, they've lost Red Bull and they're not allowed to run another energy sponsor. So it's going to be very interesting to see what that looks like. Also, I think there was a Luca Marini at the whatever it is, Valentino Rossi's 100-kilometer flat track race. He had a very different helmet all of a sudden because he's not allowed to run any energy drink sponsorship on it. It would be interesting. He might actually have a really good helmet because a lot of those helmets, especially. I mean, the helmets annoy me more than the bikes because the helmets are so dictated by the amount of money which energy drinks sort of throw at them, and that the designs are designed around the energy drink logo, either the Red Bull or the Monster Claw or whatever it might be. So I'm quite interested to see both Joan Mir and Luca Marini's helmets. That's going to be interesting. If there's going to be a bigger change, because Repsol are losing Red Bull, and that was not huge, but it was a decent chunk of real estate. I think that's going to give them a bit more freedom to change. But usually, the thing with Repsol Honda is trying to spot liveries is about you have to get your little tape measure out and see that they've moved one line 0.6 millimeters to up or down on the bike.
Just curious, Dave, you spoke about the new liveries and potential new colours and logos. Are we going to see a bit more of the Monster Claw on your dress in your attire in 2024?
I mean, there are those who would say that I'm a monster already. So I don't understand why Mr. Sugar Waterman isn't giving me large quantities of money just for existing around the paddock.
Neil, in all seriousness, perhaps we can look at maybe Trackhouse or Gresini. I mean, those are going to be the kind of newish forms of livery, colours, design, whatever, because there's not really many other wholesale changes, right? I mean, what those motorcycles look like will be the main novelties in MotoGP for 2024.
Yeah, possibly a bit of a change with Repsol Honda. I mean, if Repsol put the logo to half an inch to one side, then you would have to say that signifies a major change for them. I'm being serious though. But Trackhouse, obviously they'll come in with a fresh look, I would say. Interesting at the team launch that they had a Stars and Stripes livery, referencing, I think, Nicky Hayden, the one that he ran at Laguna Seca one year. And Gresini, I'm not so sure. I mean, I'm kind of hopeful that they don't change up too much because I'm quite a fan of that little sky blue number that they've had for the last couple of years. But yeah, so I think Trackhouse is probably the one the most keep an eye on.
Yeah, I mean, Trackhouse is going to be a massive change, but I'm really interested to see what happens with Gresini. Precisely as we said earlier on, Mark said he's not riding for money, and he has a lot of personal sponsors. Will they end up on the bike? Who knows? They'll certainly end up on his leathers, and it's going to be really interesting to actually see the leathers that he ends up running and how much space of that is left over. I presume there'll be someone they'll be selling a patch on his little toe for about 10 grand.
What's the thoughts also on this phase for digital launches versus actually having an event? It does seem, I mean, a digital launch can go on for like an hour online, or it can go on for 2.5 minutes. It's, I don't know. Do we actually, as journalists, prefer going to an event? I mean, there is obviously the ability to get content, but then otherwise, from what I hear from teams, it's a big budget, it's a ball ache, and the return is not necessarily what you would be expecting.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there is very little return from it unless you can find a way to really exploit it. I really think I like the way that Ducati do it. I'm not just saying that because they're going to put me in a hotel for 3 nights and feed me. But the way that they're doing it is they're actually partnering with the ski resort Madonna di Campiglio and with the Trentino region to promote it as a form of tourism. Obviously, they've got a much bigger package that they're launching. They'll be launching their World Superbike team as well, but also I believe they're also launching motocross project there as well.
Yeah.
So That's a really big thing. And then it starts to make a lot of sense to actually do it. And also, I suspect that the fact that they are world champions also makes it a lot easier. But from a lot of teams, there is very little. I mean, like if you invite journalists, all they're going to do is ask questions, and you don't want that. What you want is to be able to present things for your sponsors. Certainly, the more low-key Ducati events that I remember from the past, one of the main things there was getting the sponsors on board, getting the sponsors up so they can get their pictures taken with the bike, with the riders at the launch, looking nice in a suit and all the rest of it. And it was more about keeping sponsors happy than anyone else. So, there is a very limited, I mean, in the end, a podium shot will get you a lot more traction than sort of 10 minutes of a picture of the new livery.
Yeah, I think it depends on the kind of situation with the team. I mean, a massive rider change like Marc going to Gresini Ducati, obviously, I think that warrants maybe a visit because, well, it should have been the first time that Marc basically spoke on the matter. It turns out with the Estrella Galicia promotion, it won't be, but I still think it'll be worthwhile to go there to hear him speak, to see him speak on such a big thing. Even if it is just one day of testing at Valencia, it is still really quite valuable to learn exactly what he felt about that. And then, yeah, as Dave said, if a manufacturer celebrating a massive kind of achievement like what Ducati have done in the past year, and of course launching the new motocross team, then yeah, I think that makes sense to kind of go to that as well. But generally for team presentations, I mean, as long as you can kind of get 30 minutes with the team principal, 15, 20 minutes with the rider via Zoom, like I think KTM have done or Yamaha have done over previous years with their digital launches, then I think that's fine, to be honest. The travel isn't necessary.
Yeah, I mean, fans are looking online at the photos and the small videos, and that's it. I mean, you can tick a lot of boxes just by doing that. But then, for the, say, 60 to 150 people, they're actually in a room listening to the kind of representative talks or looking at the images. As we know from Ducati last year, there was also promotion, as you said, Dave, for the region, for the Audi group. There was a heavy presence from them. There is a lot of kind of political, requirements, I guess, around these things. But, the bigger the budget, the more investment there is in the racing. And of course, as promoters, Dorna Sports would like there to be as big as fast as possible. I think if you go to MotoGP.com now, there's actually like a schedule of all the team launches on there. And when there's absolutely nothing in the sport, well, basketball is still so hot. The NFL is incredibly, advanced in its season. The football season is very advanced, coming up to the next forms of the next stages of the Champions League. There's a lot of sport going on, but there's like zero with MotoGP. So I think team launches, it's just a way to keep the content out there, I guess. I'm trying to sort of put some sort of importance in that.
I mean, surely that's something you're always going to lose against, like the Super Bowl. We're coming up towards to the Super Bowl. We're in the playoff stage for the NFL. I mean, apart from the fact that you can't really compare MotoGP and the NFL in terms of scale because they're so vastly different. But it's the same thing when there is so much external content. There's a lot of skiing content on now. There's here in Holland, there's loads of stuff on speed skating. Can't turn the TV on without we're seeing people skate around ice rinks. So, is it better to try to compete with that, or is it do you just throw race fans a bone every now and again?
Well, at least you're out there. I mean, if you're not out there, you're not doing anything, then you're invisible. And I think, that was one of the messages from Dan Rossamondo, who wanted to sort of, get MotoGP more present outside of just the 20 or 21, 22 Grand Prix races and the tests per year. But I started off by bringing up this topic by mentioning liveries. So I wanted to ask you guys for your personal favorites. Neil and I touched on this. I'm on a Patreon podcast special recently, and we're talking about how Suzuki never looked better than when it was in Pepsi colors. I mean, for me, it was always Rothman's Honda. There was something about that blue and white, even though it didn't really change that much. It was just, I thought, an exceptional looking motorcycle. The JPS Norton as well, all black, just apart from this sort of gold and grey or silver trim. I mean, Trevor Nations never looked more menacing around a race circuit than when he was like, clad like some evil knights on a JPS Norton. I just wondered, as we see new bikes for 2024, whether you two guys had any particular preferences.
I mean, obviously the Bumblebee, the Yamaha Bumblebee, and especially the one that Rossi and Colin Edwards rode at Laguna Seca. I think that was just a fantastic looking motorcycle. And another personal favourite was, I think it was the Danny Pedrosa's Repsol Honda, the retro Repsol thing that they did at Valencia. I want to say at Valencia, and it would have been maybe 2013, 2012, 2013, 2014, around that time. That looked fantastic with the really old, I think it was like a 1950s or a 1960s Repsol logo. I really liked that, and I'd really like them to see them bring that one back as well. And in fact, I seem to recall, I think in Valencia, just driving around between Valencia and Barcelona, there was a bit more of that old logo at actual Repsol petrol stations. So you sort of wonder if that's not going to, if they're not going to bring that back. I would love that. I think it's just fantastic.
I can't choose one. I have to kind of give you a little selection of my favorites, but I think Kevin Schwantz's 88, 89 Pepsi Suzuki, that was sort of like what first attracted me to Kevin Schwantz when I was watching Grand Prix as a wee rat bag kid. Also, I think John Kaczynski's 94 Kajiva, all red, number 11, just looked so precise and fabulous, so pretty. Biaggi's 95 Chesterfield Aprilia in the 250 class, silver number 1, just again pure class. And a bit of a random one, but I think it was Toru Okawa. This is a really nerdy one, but Toru Okawa's 97 Aprilia Honda. He was sponsored by Benetton, and it had this delicious color of sky blue. It just looked absolutely amazing. And obviously the kind of the shape of the old Honda 250s as well, just pure race bike. It was wonderful. So yeah, I think those would be my big 4.
The other thing we have to point out is that those bikes looked really good as well. I mean, like obviously aero, but the shape of especially the Aprilia RS250 is just, I mean,
art.
Yeah, absolute porn.
Typical, Neil. In a time when we're trying to do better video podcasts, you pick the most obscure motorcycle to try and find an image to put over the top. So, yeah, thanks for that one. But other subjects, we'll be reviewing the team launches over the next couple of podcasts. We're going to be on the road, so we'll try to get the Paddock Pass podcast online as timely as we can. Other matters, the Fantasy League that will be starting up, of course, in the next couple of months. Iributo, the winner from 2023. We still need to know who you are. DM us on Twitter if you want some prizes. This is your last chance. In the next couple of weeks, if we don't hear from you, then we're going to have to be tightening up Dave's wardrobe even more with some free Alpine Stars clobber. So
I'll be Iributo if he doesn't get in touch or she doesn't get in touch.
Yeah, please don't let the Paddock Pass podcast be a victim to corruption. That's it pretty much, guys. Thanks to Michael Laverty, to Renthal, to KTM, and to Fly Racing. We'll be back next week from Italy.